If you haven't yet, be sure to check out part 1 of this episode with our guest Lizzie Pratt, available wherever you get podcasts.
Welcome to How I See It with me, Mark Pratt, and
Justin Sternberg. This is a podcast that works to counter cultural polarization through thoughtful conversations. I'm curious, Lizzie, in like some of these classes you've taken, is there any like mind-blowing things that you've come across where you're like, I don't know, kind of like that kind of stuff, or maybe stuff that is new understanding about the brains that kind of blows our minds? Is there anything that's kind of come up? Or is it a ton of things and we don't have time for it?
Well, one thing I was thinking as you're talking is I've actually really appreciated it. And part of this is probably because I go to a Christian school. But in some of these classes, we've had the conversations of monism and dualism. And okay, so here we are learning about the brain. Let's talk about the soul. And so there are these, classes of thought, which monism is like, there's no distinction between mind, soul, body, all this stuff. But for dualism, and also this is probably where most Christians fall, is that there is a difference between our body and then our mind or soul. And even if you're not a Christian, you can still say, we either have a soul or a mind. And a lot of these conversations come back to that question of, can you separate them? And if so, like, is it a physical entity that is still just contained in your body? And so, in one of my capstone classes I just took we're just basically asking the hard questions in science, and we spent days on this idea of dualism, and if we do believe that the soul and mind or soul and body are different, can they be separated? Or how does that look in a Christian worldview? And so a lot of times there's still questions we still don't have answers to, like physically, literally, but it does come back to a worldview and like how I see it, I guess, of like how do your soul and your mind interact and your body and that kind of thing. But beyond that, I mean, I think I've really just benefited from like the pathways, learning, like my favorite class was neuroscience, and literally just learning the distinct pathways of like this part of the brain to this part of the brain to this part of the brain crosses over the brain here, down this, down the spinal cord here, whatever. And also just, I mean, you've talked about this before, but the neuroplasticity of like their brains are just, crazy. Like it's basically the new frontier of like what we don't know. We don't we pretty much know almost nothing, in comparison to what is to be known, but also we know way more than we used to. And even just learning about like the different medications and how those impact, like, I talked with Dad a little bit after the last podcast he did about this, of like, we have these, antidepressants, and, we know generally what they do, but in the past couple of years, we've been realizing that they actually don't work the way we think they would. And so we have this, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs, that, they're supposed to do this and we think they do this, but they actually don't work like we thought they would time-wise. So maybe they're not doing what we think they're doing. So maybe we should figure out what they're actually doing before we give them to people, right? So just like how much is fluid and dynamic in what we're learning, and, how we're taking these really great steps, but also like, we don't really know exactly what we're doing all the time. So yeah.
And that's what science is, right? It's like hypothesis, and then testing that hypothesis, and then when you test it long enough, you're like, I think we got it. And but that never stops. The testing never stops if you like move it into real world. Like you're saying, we've been using antidepressants for, I don't know, 70 years and maybe
long time.
And so we're able to start to see some more of that, where science can continue to learn from that. And
you were talking about the timetable. How long does it take
so traditional antidepressants take 6 to 8 weeks to really start kicking in. Like, you take them for that long, and theoretically they should work on your neurotransmitters, like your serotonin and dopamine, within hours to days. So yeah, and that's another interesting thing, is just the crossover of how interconnected your brain is. And so this semester I got to do some research with one of my professors, and using an antidepressant on potential PTSD symptoms, and because they target similar parts of the brain, but different, have different influences or different like outcomes and effects, just how, because of how interconnected your brain is, how much I think in the future we'll learn is different things impact different parts of the brain in ways that we didn't think they would. And you were talking about earlier how you can, take some parts out of the brain and you don't really see an effect, but other parts you do. It's interesting because I think in a lot of reading and learning I've done is that it really does affect something. Yeah. Even if we don't know. Sure. If you don't know right now what it is, or, it doesn't have a great impact on someone's day to day, like it's more there than I think we think. So
we may not always see it, but there's something that's being impacted in such a way that says, this is still important. Yeah.
Especially when, coming from a biology, background study or whatever, to be able to see, well, the body pays the toll probably in one way or another. And also, like you said, even like our long-term thinking or long-term ability to trust or believe or whatever it is, like I could see how that could be affected and maybe not see it right away. Right. Yeah. That's interesting. Some of my favorite doctors, we go to the doctor a lot for Jewel because she has some stuff that she deals with or whatever, but the way they talk about those things people give, prescription drugs. Man, wow.
You looked like you were dealing cards there for a moment. I wasn't.
In some ways they're like drug dealers, so I guess it's appropriate. But no, I love the ones that I respect the most. They talk about it like, well, we've seen that when this is done like this, it can have this effect. Sure. Yeah. And they're not like sure about everything and like, oh yeah, this is what you take when you have this problem. They are more scientists and they're able to say, we can only go by what we see. And what we've seen is it seems to have this good effect for people in this situation that's similar to what she's in. Sure. Therefore, we can say with reasonable certainty it could be helpful. It's like they have a lot of disclaimers. It's because they don't know, and they know they don't know. And the smartest doctors, the smartest scientists actually are the most aware of how little they know. Absolutely. And that was cool about, again, this podcast of this guy just saying how little we know. And there's actually a quote from the Wait But blog post I wrote down by a guy named Moran Kerf. He's a neuroscientist. He said, if the human brain were so simple that we could understand it, we would be so simple that we couldn't.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, that's good. That's really good.
Yeah.
And it's like every area of science we start to dip into and we get pretty far in, every single area. It's like, whoa, it goes so much deeper. And, the world's renowned scientists in any given area will tell you the same thing. Sure. Which kind of ties back to what you're saying, how great thou art. Yeah. This idea that like this creator had the ability. And what's cool too is like with this stuff, all this technology, Neuralink, all this kind of stuff, everything we've gained up to this point is a result, because again, we're all believers and we believe in our higher power, God and all creator and creationism, is a result of him unlocking certain aspects and saying, okay, you can know this now, and we like to think we're so smart and we figured it out and we're, but like, again, the smartest scientists go, no, we're not that smart. We're pretty dumb when it comes to this, but at least we figured this out,
We're scratching the surface in many cases is what you tended to hear.
And even the areas that we feel like we've got that part on lockdown, it's like we've discovered new things, like antidepressants. Like, we've been using these for 70 years. We think we know what they do. And apparently there's science saying maybe we don't quite know, Yeah. And that's a pretty common theme, I would say, as our technology grows and we're able to see more about the effects of things. And
I thought it was interesting too that in that podcast, they definitely, the person they interviewed didn't even necessarily didn't desire to cross over into the pharmaceutical aspects of what our brain, because he was just basically he understood that there was enough complexity in what they were trying to do with this, electrical interface, if you will, that it's like, now we don't deal with that technology here. You know?
Like specialized kind of thing. Like this vein is deep enough and wide enough that I don't.
Exactly.
Because they were specifically, I think it was related to neuroplasticity and like their brain's ability to change, and saying like pharmaceuticals and psilocybin and stuff like that has some pretty insane effects on our neuroplasticity and our minds to be able to change. It's like, have you guys considered that? Like, what if you guys tackled that problem too? He's like, no.
Yep.
Like the ability that we can do that is so minuscule compared to these pharmaceuticals that it doesn't make sense for us to study that. We're just about figuring out when your brain thinks this thing does a signal fire, and can we listen to that and then therefore do something. It's like
That's right, yeah.
That's good enough. Right. That's kind of Yep. I think that was pretty fascinating too, because again, you think it's just simple. That it's so typical. The less you know about a thing, the more simple you think it is.
Sure.
You know, and that's why it's so easy for clickbait and all these things. It's like, now I know exactly what I need to know about Neuralink because I read that headline, or whatever.
And I think for me, that aspect, I really like that imagery of the concert of the mind, you know, to where it's just these little nuances, you know, the piccolo, the flute, you know, percussion, all of that just being timed together in our brain in such a way that all of that timing, and I think that's where the AI part came into, was this ability to take this sequence of switches being turned on, turned off, and being able to learn that in such a way that says, okay, when I create these electrical synapses, these connections, that's in that order, that moves the cursor down into the left. You know, and I think the part that fascinated me as well, he never said how many of the transmitters they had to put in the brain, but it was like definitely a number, you know, from the way I heard it, that were here, and here, you know, to be able to create these things. And it adds to what you were saying. I until you shared, I never realized that this connected to this like a flow chart, you know. You know, it's like I knew this area was responsible for hearing, this area was responsible for sight, you know, from a generalized aspect of the brain.
Well, and so much of a lot of the testing they're doing now in research is using GBC, which is global brain connectivity, and that's something that like they're using as a measure of health, shall we say, like, you know, in studies of, you know, depression or whatever, like the person that has greater GBC from this specific area to this specific area is doing better than this person, or, you know, vice versa. When there's this connectivity that is cut off, that is actually, you know, a sign of detriment towards that. And, you know, so that's kind of interesting how much even just like the connections and the fluidity of the brain is recognized in a very concrete, like they basically measure it in, there's a word, but basically like if you think about pixels, like Minecraft pixels of like a part of the brain, and you measure that thing and how well it connects to this one in a different part, like that's a physical measurement they have now of like
that's cool.
Health and well-being. And I think that is a very as I was thinking as you're talking about the concert of just like, so we have this kind of intimidating thought of like, you know, Neuralink and brain control and that kind of stuff, but how much God's not really intimidated by our questions, and like how I've learned a lot about how science is a form of worship, and like God is just never threatened by us. And granted, there are things that, you know, cross the line and are unethical, and, you know, that we, just because, you know, not everything that I can do, I should do, you know, Paul says that, but how much of just our scientific advancement can be seen as just like a worship. And here we are just learning more about our creator and our God and how he made us. And God's just really not threatened by our questions ever. So
cool.
Yeah.
I was thinking about what you were talking about, the GBC, the, you know, global brain connectivity. We're also learning a lot about that. And I was thinking about, isn't that part of what, you know, well, years ago it was Sudoku, you know, would help offset Alzheimer's and supposedly, but isn't that kind of what you're talking about? We even know how this is connected, and we know that if we're doing these types of things, that may invariably help that connection to increase.
Sure.
And I'm thinking about, it's like developing your percussion section when you've, focused most of your life on, the Windwoods or whatever, the reeded instruments, or, it's just kind of, and I think that's part of our tendency, is to focus on the things that I'm good at. And I think at times as humans, we get scared of developing these other parts because it's like, what if I don't do that well? What if it doesn't sound right? What, and I think, to be able to embrace that, yes, you do that well and I do that well or something else well, but it's all a part of my ability to worship when I'm even developing parts that I'm uncomfortable with.
Sure. And you think about even individuals that have lost a sense, whether that's sight or sound, or we have a sensory cortex, and it's actually interesting because you can lay it out and you can look at it and assign all the different like hands and feet and even all your skin receptors have a place on the brain. And of course you have different senses, like your eyes and your ears are much bigger. But when you lose one of those, like the other ones creep into it. And so it's not just dead space. It's now augmentation of the other senses that, are close by to it physically. Like you're physically, if your ear sense is closer to your, eye sense, and you lose your eye sense, like your ear's going to creep into it physically. Like those neurons are going to be taken over there
as part of neuroplasticity, that ability to grow greater connection or enhance.
Which it ties into like why a lot of times blind people's sense of hearing or whatever can be enhanced compared to which is fascinating because again it ties into like the brain's capability too is much greater than we currently use. I mean, I remember growing up, they always said we use 6% or 10% of our brain, something like that. And I don't know how accurate that is. I feel like that number's been changed since then.
I don't think very accurate.
I'm pretty sure we use the whole brain. It's just that our brain is capable. Its capability is unknown. I think that's more accurate to say, but we use all of it. I don't think, like you said, if you take a little chunk out, it's not like, well, you still got 90% that you can lose and still have the same function. I don't think that's how it works.
Sure.
And I liked your analogy with the concert too, because going back to what Lizzie was saying about if you take out a part, so like if you remove the piccolo.
Sure.
Right?
Don't remove the piccolo.
I'm just saying, the piccolo player got a cold and they couldn't play today, you might not notice today, but if you listen to this piece, every weekend and it's your favorite piece or whatever, eventually you really, I really want that piccolo back, right? Yeah. And it has a part to play and it matters, and the original intention of the creator of that piece of music or whatever said there needs to be a piccolo right here, right? And so without that part playing its part, you will see an impact. It will change things. And again, you may not notice it on the first run, or you might not be familiar with it or see its impacts, but it does play a part. And I think that's why I really like that analogy, because I think it does tie into that too, where every part plays is part of the entire concert, right? And like, if you remove a part, it's not like, well, that we didn't need the piccolo player anyway. And it's like, no, they're there for a reason. Yeah. Because Mark wants to hear the piccolo.
I do. I like the piccolo.
Do you?
Yeah.
What does the piccolo sound like?
It's a very high. It's that really high above the flute, when you get into that trilly, sound that's way up top. Yeah.
Interesting. It makes me think of original Nintendo Mario Brothers 3. There's this very high fluty song in one of the parts, and I bet you it was piccolo.
It could very well have been. Yeah. Lizzie used to play the flute. Yeah. She can describe what it sounds like, maybe.
I'm not going to try.
That's a little how I see it pressure for you right there.
That's right.
Yeah.
Mark, I'd like to hear you make a piccolo sound.
We'll pass on that. I mean, it would be, I just don't know how to, other than like almost screeching into the, it's like,
we'll spare the listeners.
I can hear it in my mind. I can hear it in the concert in my mind.
There you go. Yes. There you go. So don't remove the piccolo.
Yeah.
I think that's what we're saying.
That's one of the things we're saying. Yes.
That's my takeaway.
No, but any other parts that just kind of came to either one of your minds from because for me, I'll set it up. I shouldn't just throw that question out there like that. For me, listening to that podcast, it was interesting to see how it went from, it was a 2-hour podcast. Let's be honest. I struggled.
Mark slept a few times.
I especially in the beginning when it was, yeah. But I want to recognize that first, really, from my perspective, the first half hour to 45 minutes was about Neuralink and the brain connection. And then they kind of developed off and they talked about, animals and treating animals kindly and research and, and it just to where really in that 2 hours, 30 minutes to 40 minutes was about the connecting of the brain.
Well, once he figured out all you're doing is, it's like, all right, what else can we do?
That's exactly it, And so I was just curious if there was something else that either one of you kind of brought in or heard in that just kind of created a thought in such a way that you really hadn't thought about. I mean, before.
I see Lizzie's thinking.
No, I'll let you go ahead.
Okay. One of the things he talked about had nothing to do with Neuralink, but this guy has this implant in his hand.
Yeah.
It's an RFID chip, which I forget what that stands for.
Radio frequency identification device.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Nice job, Mark.
Dad.
For someone who hates technology.
I was awake at that time. That was honestly one of the things that I was interested to hear about.
Yeah.
Because I'll be honest. I mean, a lot of what we do, how I see it, it's not that we know this information, but there's passions involved, interests. And I think we all have those. But yes, back to the RFID.
Yeah, that was interesting. And it really has nothing to do with Neuralink, but they tied it in some ways in the sense that, like, you're willing to do that to yourself. As a scientist, would you be willing to do some Neuralink brain stuff? And he's like, sure, if we get to that point, but right now it doesn't make sense to try and do the things we're doing for me because I can move my limbs and type on a keyboard just fine. So it'd be kind of setting that back. But if there was an opportunity to do something, he would do it. But yeah, the RFID chip, he was basically saying it acts as his car key, it acts as a key to his house. He can store little bits of information on there, like his Bitcoin wallet key, that kind of thing.
Passwords.
Yeah, exactly.
Passcodes.
Yeah. Which I don't think the storage amount is enough for a real password storage.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think the amount of storage is very small. Like I think you'd be surprised in terms of like megabytes. I think it's probably megabyte or less. Like I don't know.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I could be wrong.
No, that's okay.
Probably wrong, but
that's part of your wisdom there, Justin. You're willing to admit you may not know.
Just based on what I know of RFIDs, but that could obviously be changing, and they could be making enhancements in that. And I honestly didn't even know that was a thing till he talked about he had his implant. Yeah. I mean, I didn't really know till I heard.
Well, we've been chipping things for a long time.
Yeah,
like
but just didn't know you'd put it in
signals.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean,
that's true.
And I think in some cases, when I hear of chipping animals, it's like that becomes, from my perspective, based on your end times analogies, it's like, okay, in some ways we may not be far off from that technology, the ability to have, especially my identification, things that verify who I am, and I no longer have to produce a, driver's license or,
And again, the thing is, we already have that with our phones. It's just not. So this is, when we come to the theological conversation and the end times theology or whatever, I get very fuzzy on it. Like, at what point does it become evil, right? Mm-hmm. Because, like you said, there's parts of our phones that are, I would say nothing's inherently evil. It's our
amoral
humanity it's amoral, and our humanity is what makes it evil. So, when it comes to the mark of the beast, like, where is that line crossed? Because clearly it's not a device on you that helps identify you and helps you pay for stuff. Because we've been doing that for a while. Your phone can pay for stuff. It can identify. You can carry a picture of your license on your phone and use it for identification. And, it's that. We're there already. It just happens to be something we carry instead of that's in a pocket under my skin. It's in a pocket on top of my skin.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying?
I do. And I'll be honest with you. I think, in some cases that is an awareness maybe that I bring into how I see it, to the point of when we have these conversations, there's a part of me that is basically saying, I want to be heard saying, I don't know.
Yeah.
And I think, in some ways, technology is very advantageous. It is amoral. And yet there is going to be a line someday. And I think in some ways it can become like a lie. I just accept a little bit, little bit at a time. And suddenly, well, is that really a lie? And I think I may carry the technology right now, but it's like, well, we're already doing this. What's a chip underneath my skin? That's the part where my mind goes in that conversation is like, same thing, probably more so is, where is that line?
Yes.
And, and the fact that, we're chipping animals, for identification. So if they get lost, makes perfect sense from a science perspective to be able to find somebody. We're tracking people now, with the phone, it's just, and so I think that's where, and I think, there is this connection, if you will. And here again, on my understanding is very limited. If we're able to go to a digital currency, that all, of course, makes sense as we think about, the dollar or, currency, that we put in our hands, cash, those kind of things, to be able to have this digital currency that everybody around the world uses, and I can tell how much I have by this chip, and all I got to do is pass it under this reader. All that makes perfect sense. The thing.
We already do that.
Exactly. And that's where I'm at, is like,
I can't tell you the last time I held a piece of paper to pay for something. I honestly can't remember. It's all fake numbers that move from this thing to this thing to I know you got your wad there.
No, it's not wad. I'm just saying, it's like I don't leave home without it. As far as cash goes, type stuff. But but that's the part that I think.
Well,
about.
The question is, when you say where's the line, is the question that we're probably asking is, where's the line, and are we going to know it when we get to it?
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So I think the Bible says that. The words are that even the elect might be fooled. It's something along those lines. This idea that it's so convincing that even the elect might be fooled, but it gives this, to me, pretty clear indication that they won't. At least that's my reading of it, my understanding of it, and I trust that. Like, I think ultimately I have to just go, all right, Holy Spirit, you're inside me. You'll know when I'm. You'll warn me, and up until that line, I don't like. No one's saying, oh, crap, I pay with my phone. Dang it, I accepted the mark of the beast already. I'm doomed. Yeah. We're not at that point. And I'm not too concerned about worrying about that line and slipping over it. I'm going to trust that it will be clear in me from a spiritual sense, like through the Holy Spirit, when that line is tripped. And I think it will be clearer than we think, but I think it will be easy for us to go, yeah, I can see why you're saying this would be a good idea for all of us, but I believe it's wrong 100%. Like, I have no doubt, and here's why, and I'll be able to point to.
And that's where I want to be. I want to be responsible in what we're doing here and saying, I don't know.
Yes.
And you have to be able to decide that line for yourself. Yeah. This information, this opportunity is out there, but whether that's what you need to do, I guess we're just conveying information at that point.
Yeah, and it's definitely been a passion subject of mine to make science less scary, kind of like what you're saying. Like, it is an opportunity for worship, because what's the primary job of a scientist? It's observation, right? It's just watching a thing and seeing what it does, and then testing a theory, and now watching again. Okay, now that I have a hypothesis, let's watch some more. Okay, that didn't work out. Let's come up with a new. All right, let's watch again. And watch. Observe. And like, that is a synonym for worship, really. Observation. It's the ability to take in and go, wow, okay, and like, so I definitely agree with that. And so, this whole mark of the beast thing, I think I've seen in the church I grew up in, kind of some of that generation, a fear of technology, which translates into a fear of science. And to me, that's a passion subject of mine. I don't think we have to be afraid of science. I believe that everything we learn, he's given us. He's opened that door. He's turned the page for us, So I'm not afraid we're going to turn a page. He's going, oh, you weren't supposed to see that one,
Right.
Yeah.
But I think and here again, not from a fearful standpoint, but I think with the information, we have to be mindful of kind of the lie, if you will. Did God really say that? You follow me?
Yep.
Kind of that original lie. It's like, well, did he really say you couldn't do that?
Yeah.
And I think that's where it comes back to each person having that relationship and accountability, ultimately with God, regardless of what a culture may do. So,
or what you and I say.
Very much so. Yeah.
Which is kind of what you're saying.
Yeah. Back to that other question. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Justin, if you're, but did you have any other thoughts that came out of the podcast? Or even your notebook, for that matter.
Yeah, my trusty neuroscience notes here.
That's thick.
It is, like a whole semester's worth. Not necessarily just from the podcast. I would say some of the conversations I've had recently surrounding ethics and just what does it mean to augment or enhance in a way that doesn't. The whole question of what does it mean to be better and to do things better and to advance as humanity, because I think we need to be careful of not belittling or saying that someone's current state is less than because of something that they have. So I haven't talked about this. I haven't talked about the Neuralink, neuroscience side of things in my classes, but we've also talked about like genetics and how, okay, if we're gonna do genetic enhancement kind of stuff, is that saying that someone's current genetics aren't good enough, or is that actually being helpful? And so it's, I'm not making an opinion statement. I'm just saying that this is something that it's a worthy question to ask of what is the purpose? And I would say, in my opinion, there is a good purpose to a lot of what's happening, and that it is a natural progression of science and just advancement, but also not saying that someone's lived experience with something that is a hardship in their life is not worthy of, is less than, or is something. So we think about someone with Down syndrome that has the genetic condition.
Okay.
And there's countries that have eliminated that condition, and maybe not saying that the neuroscience stuff is there yet, or thinking about that, and it is more for help than hurt. But so would other people would say that too about different genetic things. And so just asking the question of what does it mean to enhance or be better or advance in a way that doesn't say that the current state is less than. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
We've briefly mentioned the thing about Down syndrome in past episodes, and this idea that if you could choose, if you could know and then choose, no, I don't want my baby to have Down syndrome, fix that, I think unanimously every parent would say, of course we want to fix that. And yet, we've talked about parents who have kids with Down syndrome and the beauty that comes as a result of that situation in their life. And I can tell you that many of the Down syndrome parents that I know would say, no, I would not change that about them. That is part of how God made them, and that's beautiful because of all these reasons. And so I think that's a good point. And it's fascinating. I think that's the beauty of our Creator, right?
Sure.
In that He can, it's the work of redemption in our Creator, where He can take something that's bad and turn it to good.
Sure.
And when we, kind of go into that idea of trying to remove all the bad, I think limits some of the opportunities or visibility into His ability to redeem things.
Sure.
But to whether if there was a marker that you could say, I know that this baby's going to have Down syndrome unless you do X. And something non-invasive or whatever, obviously certainly not abortion, which is I think when you say some countries or whatever, that's what they do. Hey, do you want it to take care of this situation? Yes, please take care of it. That kind of thing, and it's abortion. But if there was a way to say, use that thing and it will fix the chromosome or the genes or whatever. Ethically, is that okay? I mean, I think yes. But is it?
Your piccolo player comes to mind. I think when we miss out, I think on that we're missing the piccolo player is no longer available. That helps us see things or hear things differently. Without that diversity of valuing who people are the way they are type thing. And granted, like you say, if there's a way that a person could be, but I still think about it in the context of difficult situations. In some ways, if we could remove all the difficult situations in our lives, would we?
Well,
and go ahead, challenge.
I think we've attempted to do that for the duration of our existence, and we've done a pretty good job. We've come really far about removing difficulties to the point where life's pretty convenient. I have air conditioning. I sit at a desk and work, and that's what I do for a job. Like I don't have to go out in a field, remove rocks from a field, and even farmers, right? They have machinery, whatever. We've done that. And yet our existence is still painful. And I don't think we can remove pain and sin and all these things. Like you just can't, because sin is the true problem there. And like we've talked about this before, but like as our culture moves forward, we're seeing other maladies replace other previous maladies. So now depression and anxiety are at insane levels, because like all I'm left to do is consider the existential aspects of my life, versus like I don't have time to think about that. I got to go out in the field and remove the rocks. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think there's that limitation that will always exist in that we have a sinful human nature that will always exist no matter how much you remove the difficult parts. We'll find ways, it will leak back in a different way.
Sure.
So even if you remove the piccolo player of Down syndrome or whatever, I think it's silly to think that, well, there won't be, another thing.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Anything else, Lizzie, that comes to mind?
I don't think so.
No? I was also from the podcast, I was also thinking about too, they talked about brain atrophy, how to have brain health. I thought that was a good thing, and they did talk about the aspect of there is a definite ratio. And here again, I'm not, bashing alcohol, but they definitely talked about how there is a direct correlation, the way I heard it, between the amount of, brain atrophy that occurs between a person who does not drink at all and a person who has one drink a week. There's definitely a correlation and atrophy, our brain shrinkage. And he was talking about, alcoholics that would have a brain basically the size of a walnut, if you will. And it's just, that's kind of sad. And I think, being mindful of how we worship God by, the ability to take care of what he has given us, not that, our bodies become God, but I think, that was another thing that I took away. It's like, okay, yeah, there's some things that I can do, that I do that affect my brain health, and the ability to recognize that in such a way that says, okay, yeah, how am I stewarding what I have been given? So I thought that was kind of just a good, nice, a neat eye opener. And of course, he mentioned, pharmaceutics and so forth too, and, different ones that, alter brain ability, that kind of thing. But I thought it was just interesting to be able to think about that. How do we take care of our brains as in this brain segment?
Being involved in Celebrate Recovery for so many years, like I've certainly heard a bajillion stories of people who have no right to be thinking. Right? like you said, the walnut brain thing, like just the amount of chemicals that their body endured, whether it was drugs or alcohol. to me, it's also amazing. It kind of, again, it comes back to the incredible nature of our Creator and His ability to redeem, right? And to where someone who has no business being able to even use their brain the way they abused it is now, standing in front of you in an very intellectually sharing their story. And like, you just see how God, our brain is not the sum of the chemicals, right? It's not the sum of the atoms. There's also something beyond it. There's the spirit and the soul that we were kind of talking about that tie in, and we don't quite know how it all works. But what I do know is some of the smartest people I know are people who are recovering alcoholics and drug addicts, and just like, it's almost like the out of the mouth of babes thing. They have a clarity, I think, sometimes that it's like, because of my normal functioning brain that hasn't been abused by drugs or whatever, like, there's some clouds maybe where, I don't know. I guess the point being, kind of, number one, agreeing with you. And I think it's important to steward our brains, but also recognizing like how God can redeem even when we've abused, our brains.
It's almost like He knew we were going to mess up.
Yeah.
Made allowance.
Yeah.
Made allowance for our ability. Yeah.
It's just grace, right? Like, and that's not true of every person who's abused their brains with drugs and alcohol. Like, some come out scathed, right?
Sure.
Not unscathed. Like, they are clearly, they're missing the piccolo player and the drums and the flute and whatever. And yet, again, that's, I don't know.
Yeah. But they play the clarinet very well.
That's right.
That's right. Clearly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fair enough. Anything else?
No.
Well, that being said, Lizzie, thank you for your time.
Yes, thank you.
It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure to have you. Yeah.
If you want, we can read through that folder there. We'll be here another couple hours. So.
That's all right.
And to be honest with you, Justin, thanks for the recommendation of that podcast. While it was 2 hours and that was plenty long,
I figured you needed a little bit of a nap. So
well, I can come by those honestly.
He called John to figure out how to put it on 1.5 times.
I texted him.
Yeah.
It's useful when you got a 2 hour.
Yeah, but then I had to download an app, and it's like, so I ended up just listening to the link that you sent through the internet. So I wasn't able to speed it up. So I think that would have been helpful.
Yeah.
It had that fast forward 10 seconds though for the
helpful.
commercials are killer.
Yeah.
It's like, oh man, you get listening and all of a sudden, and that's why I'm saying we can't do commercials. I don't want to get to that point, but I understand they're making the big bucks on that podcast. They got to endorse those products.
Yeah. And we make a lot of money too.
Yes.
$0. Yeah. Yes.
But that being said, that's how I see it.
Hey, thank you for listening to our podcast. If you like How I See It, please do all the things that podcasts tell you to do. Subscribe, rate, review, follow us, and or talk nicely about us on social media. If you want to reach out, the email is us@howiseeit.click. Yep, I said .click, as in .click. Please tell your friends about this show, and we'll see you on the next one.